Hey guys, gonna wrap up the fencing unit today and then get ready to move on to our next set. I'm gonna go through the process of actually installing the fence wire, and then you'll have some questions, and the flashback will be posted on uh, the Google site. So, without further ado, we'll get to it. All right. This camera. Okay, so woven wire installation. One thing that you want to make sure when you're installing woven wire is to not just take the piece of fence and then staple it to the corner post. Those staples are only going to be attached to these horizontal wires. We typically don't want to put them on the vertical because the horizontal wires are the ones that move. Even in fixed knot fencing, they will distort that fence wire. Uh, the the proper method on every corner post is to take that wire, wrap it around so you have a nice, firm, strong hold, and then loop that wire and twist the end on every single horizontal run as it meets up. Sometimes on short stretches of fence, I will see the installation method of just taking that fence wire and going around the corner. Now, if you're only doing a short run, let's say 100 feet or less, that can be okay. If that we are tying off on 1,000-foot stretch of fence, 600 feet stretch of fence, the problem that you'll run into when you actually pull this fence wire tight is it's going to uh, get caught on that corner post, and it can severely distort how tight that fence could actually be. So, in an effort to avoid having a saggy fence or a loose set of fence wire, you'll want to make sure that that stretch is as nice and tight as you can by tying off that corner end piece of wire. So from this H brace, unless it's a very short run, we would want to loop that wire and then wrap the second set going off to the right here. Once we have that end wire tied off, we will go ahead and put a series of staples down the wire. Depending upon who is actually designing the fence or who's managing the job, I would recommend putting a staple on the corner on every single horizontal wire. Now, some people only put 5 or 6 staples in, even on the end. When we get to staples on the line, I'll talk more about my theory there. But on the end, I would recommend going ahead and adding the security of putting a staple on every single horizontal wire. Once that fence wire is secured, then we need to unroll it. Now, 2 options. We are seeing more and more farmers make the investment in using this tool called a tractor spool wire unroller. It also includes a fence stretcher, which we'll talk about. The other option, good old option, is just unroll that wire on the ground. You either bend over and then push that wire roll. If that you were working on a hillside, hopefully you're starting at the top so you can just roll that wire down the hill. Another option is to put a pipe or some round tube through the center of that spool and then get some help and unroll it. If that you're going over tree stumps or through thick grass, sometimes that's a little bit easier. That way you're not picking up and wrapping up all of that stuff as you unroll that wire. Should you run into a situation where you actually have to join 2 sections of wire, like you're doing a 700-foot stretch and your spool is only 660 feet, you need to attach the next set, or maybe you're using 2 pieces of spools. My favorite method for splicing wire is to lay the ends of the wire end to end with a portion of the wire cut off at the vertical and then wrap that side by side as tightly as possible. That gives a very nice, almost unobservable, uniform splice. Another option that a lot of people will do is they will take that vertical wire They'll cut that horizontal wire off at a vertical, and then they'll make a loop, and then they will thread that loop in, as we see is done here with the barbed wire. I don't think it gives as much of a clean finish as the butting up of those vertical wires, but it is an option. The tighter that splice can be, the less movement that you're going to have when that wire contracts and expands, if animals put pressure against it, or when you're actually completing the pulling and stretching process. We are seeing a lot of farmers move to these gripples, as I mentioned before, when building the brace. The tension that a gripple has is limited, though. We are not going to see the same amount of tension threshold as we would with this wire splice system here. So just be aware of that. Woven wire can be stretched in many different ways. Some people choose to just put the wire up with, hand tight. That's a personal preference. If it's not high tensile, it will sag pretty drastically, especially as it heats up in the summertime. One of the most common stretching methods that we see is the Amish stretching method. They call it Amish style because they kind of developed this as they started putting up a lot of fence. Essentially what you do is you take two pieces of lumber, typically 2x6s, and then through every box or between the horizontal wires, you're just going to put a bolt. And then you tighten those bolts down using a ratchet or a wrench or an impact if you've got one. You'll put a chain at the top and at the bottom, and you'll pull it somehow. Tractor, pickup truck, you could even use a come along attached to a tree or some secure post. It works very well. I have used this method in the past, and I will say that the bolts have a tendency to be distorted pretty quickly unless you're using like a grade 8 bolt. So it's just something to be aware of. It can be kind of frustrating sometimes. Because of the investment that farmers are making in this tool to unroll the wire, they actually have attached a clamping style stretcher on this spool device here. So the wire, once you get to the end of your brace or your corner post, you simply fold this this section over, and then there are bolts here or a chain system that allows you to tighten that wire, and then you pull it in place. They seem to function very well. Again, if you're purchasing this apparatus or if you see fencing crews out and about, they're probably going to be utilizing something like this just because they're doing so much fence. We kind of see a variation of that board style stretcher here. You've got a piece of steel, and then there's another piece of steel, and then going through a series of those vertical wires. The bolts, those high tensile bolts will be, we put the steel back on, we tighten the nuts down, and then we are using come-alongs or a chain here to tighten that wire. And that seems to be pretty effective. I am concerned, though, that they are, a significant distance away from their brace. Hopefully they get enough, or they have enough slack in that wire in order to be able to pull it toward the corner and make the loops when they tie it off. This one here actually threads a rod through the fence, and then you hook that rod on the hooks and you pull it. Again, very functional. I don't love this particular stretcher because there's not a whole lot of tension being applied to the top wire or the bottom wire. So it's just something that, is a personal preference, but I have seen them work and work well. Once the wire is stretched, we will want to perform the same thing at the end as we did. Instead of making the loop first and then stapling, I typically go ahead and I staple that fence on that corner post, and then get the tractor out of the way or the pickup truck out of the way and remove the stretchers, and then complete the tying utilizing this looping method. So now that the wire is tied off on each end, we're going to go ahead and complete the stapling process. If you've ever talked fencing with anybody in Kentucky, some people refer to this fastener as a steeple, which is fine. Steeples or staples, they are referring to the same fastener. Essentially, it is a U-shaped nail. There's many different styles and types. The cheaper ones are simply just bent over pieces of wire that have been clipped off to be extremely sharp. Ones that have more holding capacity are these that actually have a barb on them to limit the backing out if that animal's put pressure on that wire or over the heating and contracting of that wire. Staples are typically going to be installed at an angle. They're going to be easier to install that way and avoid splitting of wood. You can see here we are actually offsetting the grain at which that staple is entering. There are some varying views on whether or not staples should be driven in all the way. No matter the fence that I install, I like to drive the staples all the way. Some people will say if that you are installing high tensile wire, high tensile woven wire, the fixed knot stuff that's very common now, you'll want to leave that staple backed out about an eighth to a 16th of an inch. That way, should a tree limb or should animals put pressure on that fence, you get that spring action. I don't know that a 16th of an inch or an eighth of an inch is going to provide that much advantage. So I just drive them in. They have a tendency to back out anyway as that wire, again, heats and contracts during the summer months and the winter months. When we're putting staples in, we've got some options. Obviously, you can hand drive them using a hammer. Makes for a long day, but it does ensure that they go in very well, and you are, being pretty observant of that. Another option that we're seeing a lot more of are pneumatic staplers. You would have to be doing a lot of fencing in order to justify the cost of one of these. And I say that, if you are doing an entire farm, it might be worth spending the $300 to get one of these pneumatic staplers. Remember, though, you'd have to have a portable air compressor, which would typically require a generator to run that air compressor. So, something that's going to be suitable for use, you're probably looking at an investment of a $600 to $1,200 air compressor, and then the gasoline to run it. But time-wise, as we saw when we built the garden shed, you are going to be able to save a lot of time over just hand driving nails. So if it's a short stretch of fence, something you're doing on your own, if you're trying to see if that you really enjoy fencing, you might just use your hammer that you already have and install the staples by hand. If you're buying a farm, you're cleaning it up, you're going to go out and do a lot of fence work, I would definitely recommend the investment in a pneumatic stapler. And this $300 one, that's kind of the lower end. Freeman's kind of just a generic brand. If you get to a pass load, they're $500-$600 pretty easily, but you get what you pay for. One thing that I will point out that's kind of concerning, we see this gentleman here installing this fence wire, and these posts typically come in 8-foot length. So if we assume he's 5.5 or 6 feet tall, there's not a whole lot of post in the ground. Now, hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully these are 10-foot posts, and he's going to put several pieces of barbed wire on top of that fence to maybe limit wildlife traffic. But if he was installing this fence with just a few inches of that post in the ground, and he's going to lop off the top with a chainsaw, I would be very, very concerned. So just something to be mindful of here. All right. At the top, as you can see on this picture here, most of the time we are going to install barbed wire in Kentucky, and that's going to limit our large livestock species from pushing down on the top of that fence wire, rubbing their neck on it, and distorting our newly installed fence. So There are several different options. Now, if you think back to the first slides that I went through talking about wire installation, our barbed wire would already be laid out. And the reason being, I like to use barbed wire as my guide for getting my fence post straight. Some people don't. Some people prefer to use string. I just find that string moves too much in the wind. So with our barbed wire out, we already have it pretty taut. Couple of methods for tightening barbed wire. You can simply make a loop in the end and then hook your come along to it, and it will go ahead and tighten that wire nice and neatly. I have seen some loops though break as we put tension on them with a come along or with a tractor. So you want to be extremely cautious in doing so. There are a couple of other options. They do make a wire puller that actually grips and puts tension on the wire, as we see here. That's extremely functional. And then they make a, well, I'm going to back up here. You can see here, Tractor Supply sells this brand of wire stretcher called a Speedco. And what you do is you loop that wire along this wedge in this ring, and as you pull, it just seats that wire down. And then when you get done, you can take a hammer and hit that ring, and it's going to loosen up that wire. Those are a great option. You don't have to worry about loops breaking or getting distorted. The other type of barbed wire stretcher that we've got is a one-man stretcher, which is what you see here. And the wire just goes in between the jaw here around the post. You can push with your body, or you can get a helper to pull that wire nice and tight. Very handy to have and relatively inexpensive when you look at the cost of this tool. It's like 55 or 60 bucks right now on Amazon. And in the event that you have to fix some fence pretty quick, it's handy to have because you can use it on your own. You could also use it for a small stretch of woven wire if that there was an automobile accident near your farm and you're fixing a stretch of woven wire fence. You could attach that woven wire to the post and then stretch that short distance of woven wire, and it should be good and strong for some time to come. So, guys, that's all I have on installation. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'll get the questions up on the site and you can answer those. Otherwise, have a great day.